That's right. I'm on my BS again. I love ranking things. It's something I love to do. I feel like it's a great jump off point for discussion of things. I enjoy celebrating people who have dominated at things. I love Triple Triad. I love ranking Triple Triad. What can you do? Today we're going to look at the early years. We're going to use a system that's similar to systems I've used before, but I'm pretty excited about this one. So hopefully I can sell you on it too. And at the end of the video, I'll ask you, and no one will do this, but I will ask you to send me your ranking of who you think through 2006 are the greatest, I guess, tournament players, because this is only tournaments. That you can make adjustments for non-tournament stuff, of course, we all do, of all time. And I'd love to see, as I continue this series and go forward into the future, how lists change as new data comes in. And I will be showing lots of lists that change, and they should be readable and comprehensible. This should not be a confusing mess, though explaining my initial methodology will take a little bit of work. My inspiration for doing this is it could have easily been that Delial has won his 11th championship, but it was very much that Turds is now in this sort of curious spot where his total amount of achievements, you can look at this list, championships, finals, semis, icons, all that, is just ridiculous and puts him like very clearly in the top 5 of all time, right? If you just looked at, this collection of stuff, you'd say the top 5 of all time are the people I traditionally call the Big Four, the Mount Rushmore. Dalial Seto was up in Yojimbo. Um, and, Turds would be the other one there, and he'd be very firmly in that group, right? He would be much more in that group than outside that group. Obviously, there's other things you can look at, short-term dominance. There's Doc Evil, who we'll be celebrating a lot today. But if you were just looking at total achievements, Turds would be firmly in that top 5. And I think for some time you could conclude that he was racking up a lot of icons in quite short tournaments, that his win rate was not just significantly below those four, but below lots of other players as well. And you can look at some of his overall frequencies, and those suggest, oh, he's not, top 5, he's more top 20, but has sustained it longer. And, that certainly is worth something. If two players are equal talent and one sustains it 2 or 3 times as long, that player should be ranked higher. But they are a similar level. And there's a question of how much do you want to credit longevity versus peak. But I think this misses just how good Turds has been in the return, particularly in the return after the first few tournaments. He has been incredibly dominant, and dominant in a way that looks very different than him being very good for a long time. And so when you take these average stats over a long period of time, it includes him being very good for a stretch, him being okay for a stretch, him being good for a stretch, and now him being fantastic for a stretch. And when you just average all those together, it looks like, oh, he's very good, but it's more like 20th than 5th. But when you actually break it down into like component time periods, you go, wait a second, his period now is really, really dominant. And he has that longevity where he's succeeded in other eras. And that's something the averages won't quite capture. And I think the totals don't really capture it either. And when you combine those, you get the image of an accumulator rather than like a dominant force. And I think that's not right anymore. My current Hall of Fame rankings has Turds 8th all time, but I wanted to reconsider and construct a system that I thought could think this through in a way I'm happy with. And that's my inspiration for doing this is what do you do about Turds? Is he top 5? Is he top 20? Where does he land in between? And yeah. So this is a little bit of a distraction, but it's another thing I was thinking about. It's really hard to win triple triad tournament games. It's really hard. Um, in large part, not just because Triple Triad is a difficult game and because so many of the players have been playing for so long and are very good, but also because if you are a 50% player, and on this page I go through some of the math, you will not score 50% in tournaments. If your skill against the field is you should score 50%, you're going to score something like 40% against the field because only in the first round is the field representative of the level of the site at the time, of the level of tournament players at the time. By the second round, most of the weaker players are out. by the third round, it's almost entirely the stronger players. So the more rounds you play, the more you are facing something completely unrepresentative of the average skill. And so, 50% of players in any given tournament go 0-1. Only 50% of players go at least even. Only 25% of players go better than even. And 50% go worse than even. So it is a format where going 40% over time means you're probably around 50% against the field. It's really hard. It's really hard to put up wins. And someone who goes 1-1 a few tournaments in a row may feel like I'm not getting anywhere. I am average, but actually that's doing really well. It's just really hard. So that's another thing I was thinking about here is just how difficult it is to achieve 50% long term and how many players who have had, and we'll get a little more into this, who have had some tremendous achievements have not been able to sustain like greater than 50% play after that, which might strike you as like really weird or remarkable or unlikely. Like, how could a player go on, a 9-3 streak and still be a 50% player? It's actually not that hard. It's not that hard. So there's a case that like any time spent above 40% adds to a player's career. That any time above 50% is like really good. Maybe that wouldn't add to the very best, but it probably adds to a lot of people's careers. And it might be good to have a statistic that says, okay, if you average 70% for a bit and then 50% for a bit, if we take the midpoint of that, we say you're a 60% player, but we could say, okay, you were a 70% player for a while, and that 50% doesn't really hurt your career. Maybe it helps it, maybe it doesn't. We could debate that. But we should still think of you as that 70% player plus some extra time. Like that's the peak plus longevity. I hope I'm saying this well. I think it is not trivial to think about peak versus longevity once you get to specifics. I think in vague terms it can be harder. It can be easier, but I'm trying to say it in vague terms that will hold up to the specifics, and that gets somewhat difficult. Okay. So I'm gonna give two examples. The next one will go a little more in depth. But here are two players. They each play 6 tournaments. I gave their overall win-loss record and win percentage. And I ask you, who has the higher peak? Is it the player with 3-3-1s followed by 3-2-1s? So think like 3 quarterfinals followed by 3 round 3s. Or is it the player with 2 semifinals, a quarterfinals, and then 3 round 1 exits? I don't think this is obvious. If you said which had the best tournament, it would be player B. If you said who had the best 2 tournaments, it would be player B. If you said who had the best 3 tournaments, it's player B. If you said who had the best 4 tournaments, you're still going to go player B because they're overall both 11-4, but player B has the farther runs. You'd probably give it to that. Tournaments 5 and 6, you'd give it to player A if you consider a peak to be 5 or 6 tournaments. Now, depending on what point in history that is, that could easily be multiple years. That could be 1 year, right? This could be performance over a year. This could be performance over 2 or 3 years, and also depending how active they are. So it's pretty hard to compare. They clearly have done something a little different. My instinct is player B peaked a little higher, but player A is probably the better player overall. But one thing that might tell you is like maybe player B didn't peak higher because maybe player A is the better player and player B happened to get like a little lucky early. But now that we have more evidence, we should know, okay, that tournament 1-3 run was probably a little lucky, while player A's tournament 1-3 run doesn't look as lucky once we get the additional information. So I think we'd probably agree player A is a little better overall, but you might not. I mean, you might say player B's peak is higher and I don't care about the 2-1s. That would be a conclusion you could make as well. But the point is, once we start putting in data, I don't think these questions are obvious. Like, I come down as player A is better and player B probably has a slightly higher peak, but that one I could be convinced off of. And I would guess you come down in a similar place, but you could really argue a bunch of different things based on, a very simple comparison where we've kept things, reasonably under control. Let's look at two more players. Here's a new A versus B. You can see B overall has a higher career win percentage. But to answer my question, which player had a higher peak, which player had a better career, player A obviously is better at both. We can compare directly tournaments 1-5. Player B only played 5 tournaments. Player A was better over those 5 tournaments. Player A then played further another 5 tournaments where they were not quite as good, but they were still quite good. And that lowers their overall win percentage to less. But I would say they had a better peak and a better career, and yet their average win rate is lower. So this is an interesting way where career win percentage is difficult to use to compare different length careers. Because I think looking at this, I hope I constructed an example that convinces you too. I would say player A had a higher peak, player A had a better career. And now I need to pause my video for a sec. All right, we have relocated. Hopefully this hasn't created like a horrible echo or anything. And we will continue. So yeah, I think it's an interesting comparison. And I think here player A is clearly better, but you can see how certain numbers would make it look like player B probably had a better peak or something, but that's not what happened. So how do you compare players with peaks of different lengths? There's one mathematical way that I like because it's really simple. And it is just to take some number, could be various different numbers, and just add that number of wins and that number of losses to a resume. And the idea of this is basically just to regress to the mean. It's to regress towards 50%, which is the mean, even if as we've established, 50% is really hard. For the best players, regressing to 50%, I think, is fair. And just the question is, how much do you regress towards 50%? If you had 1 win and 1 loss, that gets a little way there. If you had like 100 wins and 100 losses, that probably just is so much noise it wipes out the player's actual achievements, right? So one thing this can do is it can say, okay, we have these 2 players, we have their records. One of them went 26 and 10, one of them went 15 and 5. How many wins and losses do you have to add to both before it identifies that player A had the better win percentage once we use this method, once we sort of regress the expectations towards the mean? And also one thing I'll get into a little more later is well, I'll use that example later, but there's a bunch of reasons I think this makes a lot of mathematical sense. It takes adding 4 wins or losses, setting x to 4, before player A gets the overall win percentage, and once we get to 8, somewhere in the 8 to 16 range, they start to look 1.5 to kind of 2.5% better, or 2% better. But this does suggest we probably want an x of at least 4 if we want to be able to use this to compare careers of different lengths. And once we set x to 4, we start to get, okay, player A has the more impressive win percentage over their career. And I think that's a useful note. Here's another way I approached it, which was I took every 6-0 in tournament history. I used 6-0 as an example because I knew we had about 20 of them, and because I didn't want to, if you check every 1-in-1 in tournament history, there's thousands, right? It's really hard to check all of those. Here, I had a pretty small sample, and it's also a sample that's really interesting because what do you think the average result after a 6-0 tournament is? If you're like, I think a 6-0 tournament player is an 100% player and they will win all their games moving forward, then you would set X at 0, right? You would say a 6-0 player is a true talent 100% player. Now, it turns out, A, no one is a 100% true level player, but B, yeah, people do not follow up by continuing to win all their games. So my question for you is, what percentage of games do you think 6-0 tournament winners won in their next tournament? If we add up all the next tournaments that 6-0 players played, the one immediately after the 6-0, and we took the win percentage of all those combined, what is the win percentage? And that should tell us what our X value is. So if you think, okay, they went 6-0, I think they're a 75% player moving forward. I think maybe they're not 75% player for all the rest of time, but at least that 6-0 showed I'm high enough on their current level. I think they're 75%. You'd set X equal to 3. And I think, and if you said, I think there is no evidence they're better than average, this would be a ridiculous position, you would set X equal to like infinity or 1,000 here. But I ask you to look at these numbers and think, what do you think the win percentage of someone after going 6-0 is? What is their like factual win percentage in the next tournament? You take all the 6-0 winners and you look at what they did next. What do you think they did next? And thus, what should our X value be? Because essentially this is saying that 6-0 does not actually tell you how good a player is, and to be as good as we can predictively, we are adding some number of wins and losses, and that gives us more evidence. Or that gives us a better estimate of how good they are. And you'll notice this method of adding some number of wins and losses. Let's say we added just one. If we add one win and loss, once you've played 20 tournaments, adding one win and loss is very low impact. So it is essentially crediting having longer runs because this becomes a smaller portion of what your score is. It says if you had a very short run, we should be skeptical, right? Adding a win or loss or a few wins and losses is going to make a big difference. In a long run, it's going to make very little difference. And we're saying the longer the run is, the more we actually know that was your true level. The shorter the run, the more we don't know, the more we should be skeptical. So make your official pick. What do you think X should be? And luckily, I'm going to give two results here, so you can claim you were right if you picked either of these things or something close to either of these things. So here are all the outcomes following a 6-0 in tournament history, which is a net record of 42 and 20, or 67.7%, which is an X value between 5 and 6. So if you picked in that range, great job. But you'll notice that 6-0 and that 6-1. Both of those were Doc Evil. He went 6-0, he followed it up with another 6-0, and that one is, of course, is a 6-0, so I had to check the follow-up of that, and he followed that with a 6-1. Doc Evil is an outlier in Triple Triad history. If we exclude him, it drops to around 61%. I think it drops to like almost exactly like 61.2 or something. And the closest number there is X equals 10, 61.5%. I think assuming people are not Doc Evil is the right assumption. Doc Evil is an exceptional and absurdly incredible case. And we're going to live in a world for the rest of this where we're assuming you're not Doc Evil, which means we're going to set X equal to 10. We're going to say, if you went 3-1 in a single tournament, we think you're better than 50%, but we're assuming you to be a 13 and 11 player, which is more like 55% than it is, 75%. But if you went 75 and 25, right? 75% as well, we'd add 10, it would be 85-35. That's lower than 75%, but it's still pretty close. The more you've played, the more we have faith in what you're doing. I think this is a really good mathematical way to do this. It's pretty simple, and I'm a big fan of it. And I lined it up to predict something that I think is reasonable to want to predict well. And I think it gives us a useful way. It means we can compare players who play different lengths of peaks. It can be hard to say, well, this player had a 4 tournament peak, this player had a 6 tournament peak. How much more do we value going 6 tournaments? How much more, that's really tough. This gives us a way to do it that I think makes a lot of sense. And I think by setting X equal to 10, we solve some other problems. But most of all, we say we have a way to adjust peaks of different lengths while giving credit to the longer peaks. But also like basing it on your actual results. And like if you did win a lot more, it will notice that. Now, win percentage has a core problem. Win percentage does not adjust for opposition. On the other hand, ELO ratings do. So we're going to use ELO ratings. But we're going to use ELO ratings not using a player's actual win percentage, but using our new adjusted win percentage to calculate the performance rating. And so if a player had, an 8 tournament run, we will take the opposition, we will use the adjusted win-loss record, and we will calculate the performance rating by ELO. And we're going to use whatever runs make players look best. We're celebrating players here. I'm not going to like cherry pick it to make someone look bad. I'm going to make everyone get as high a score as possible, and those scores will compete with each other. I think this is a great method. Sorry for the long methodological section. I know I always do this, but I do think it's interesting. I think figuring out how you want to quantify stuff and where you're starting from and what the weaknesses are of what you're doing is really useful. So you know what adjustments to like mentally try to make going forward. And we'll talk a little later about what I think criticism of what I'm doing should look like. Okay, so are we going to do a ranking? We've got our method. I'm going to be I don't know how many tournaments I'll include, but luckily the early tournaments, all of them don't have weird formats or anything like that, so they're all really easy for me to include. So through 06, we don't have to negotiate, like, are we including Team Rhinoas? I'd like to, but they're a real pain to do, because I don't have it set up to grab both opposing players, and do we want to adjust for if you have a better or worse teammate? It's tricky to do. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to do that, but I don't have to deal with that today, so I'm not going to. And I don't have to deal with that next time because through '08, none of those tournaments had come up either, and our next video is going to take us through '08. But now we're going to look at the scores, and we're going to look at the ELO performances. Again, these are ELO performances with 10 wins and losses added to them, which is going to lower the scores. So keep in mind, you could think these players should all be higher. That's fair. But at least they're all getting the same adjustment, so it's fair. All right. So here are the highest peaks. I think this is 33 players from 2003 to 2006. I bolded every player that won a tournament, which also means you can quickly look for non-bolded players and see some of the best performances of non-tournament winners. I put an asterisk next to any player that appeared multiple times, and I put 2 asterisks next to their second appearance. They had separate runs that were good enough to make the list. There are other players I probably could have chopped up to give them separate runs, but that would have lowered their highest score. So I gave everyone their highest score, and then if they had a completely separate run that also qualified, I included that as well. So, for instance, Kamikaze, you can see, or Cookie, say Cookie. Cookie is a really good '06 and a really good '04, and he doesn't do anything in '05. So if you combine '04 through '06, it includes '05 and it ends up watering it down. But if you take just his '06 score and just his '04 score, and again, we're adding 10 wins and losses. So, like, it is really hard to get a short term score that's that high unless you really were that good. He comes out better this way, and it means he has 2 appearances on the list. Really good job by Cookie. You can see why a lot of people came out of this era with Doc Evil and Cookie as the 2 greatest players of all time. I have long argued that Kamikaze and Sujiro and Karmazin really belong in that conversation. I think there is a very clear top 5 of all time at this point, where Doc Evil is number 1, and then Kamikaze, Sujiro, Cookie, and Karmazin are 2nd through 5th, and you can order them, I think, however you want, depending on what you value. I've long argued that Sujiro is really close to Kamikaze. And actually, you can see this looking pretty good for Sujiro here. Kamikaze's top end score is a little better, but Sujiro's 2nd place on the list is a little higher than Kazi's 2nd place on the list. So I think at this point in time, it's reasonable to argue those 2 are really close and 2 of the best players ever. Karmazin, depending how much you value peak versus longevity, could be 2nd behind Doc, could be 5th. You could even bump him out of the top 5 if you really wanted more longevity. But I really like those as a top 5, and I am curious if other people also have that top 5, and also how you order them, because I think, like, I have tended to put Cookie 4th or 5th, but there's a very good argument he's 2nd. In fact, he might be the only person with a serious argument for 1st, other than Doc. I think it's Doc, but, like, he's the closest person to having an argument. He's the only other person with 2 titles, and his 2 titles were both surrounded by other really good results, hence why he scores much higher than some of the other winners you can see. So yeah, I'm curious how people list that. I think also Jadat comes out really well here. A lot of the numbers I produce don't look that great for Jadat, and I finally made one where it's like, yeah, he's very clearly one of the best non-winners, and it makes sense why he was thought of as one of the all-time greats, especially because Ulti disappeared. And this system was really high on Waltz. I tried to look up why this happened. Like, I looked at the results, and he gets a win against Kamikaze, and he gets a loss against Kamikaze. And that's also good for the resume, because if you only lose to the very best players, you look good. And he has some other good wins. Like, he has a win against Takumi, a win against Omega Weapon, but they're not really the big names. But he also didn't really play anyone who wasn't pretty good. Once you start looking at the opposition, it doesn't jump out as this is incredible opposition, but also you notice he had like no free rounds during his best run. And most of the players, you look at their brackets and you're like, well, okay, those 2 rounds were you know, pretty free against someone who lost every game they played and didn't play very long. And Waltz, that is not the case. And I think that's how he came out so high, but I'm not entirely sure on that. I would generally think Ulti and Jadat and Kefka are the 3 top non-winners. Also, Yevon's TTAC 3 finals run was really good. I like seeing Yevon so high. He's a very fun player, still playing, and still very interesting to watch. Really sees the game in a different way, but a very compelling way, I think, than most players do. Um, Yeah, so here is my '03 through '06 list of the best peaks. You will see names like Nimloth. Nimloth played like 2 tournaments. Um, you know, you know. I know Nimloth and Doc are widely considered the 2 best players of this era. We did a vote and they came out clear top 2. Through tournaments, we can credit Doc. We can't credit Nimloth as much, but it is fun to see him there. It's just I don't have the data to show how spectacular he was. One other adjustment I want to make here is, and this is only going to be a problem in this first video, but it is a problem here, is in the very first tournaments, everyone's rating starts at the same rating because it has no information about who's better and who's worse. And that means there's no players with higher ratings to beat. So even if Kaus in his Triad Wars 1 run beats the best players and beats really good players, it's just not going to show up as that impressive here because it doesn't yet know those are really good players. The people who beat those same players in the next tournament, it's going to be like, wow, you beat really good players. But it's going to give a lot less credit to Kaus. And Broccoli wins the second tournament, it's going to give less credit to her. And Unfixable, I think, wins the third tournament. Again, anyone who '03 is listed here, like Mafi Josie is another good example, or maybe Aurora, is underrated here. Um, the strong performances in '03, '04 are not getting as much credit as they should, while the strong performances in '05, '06 I think probably are getting the credit they should. So that would be enough to say like maybe Ulti, yeah, probably should be ahead of Waltz. Maybe Kefka should be a little ahead of Jadat. You know, maybe Kaus's '03 run is actually much closer to the high end winning runs rather than looking like one of the. You'll notice like all the lower ranked winning runs are the 4 first ones, the first 4. Actually, maybe Cookie's first was before Firebrand's, but Cookie was so good. Um, but like 4 of the 5 first tournaments are the lowest scores of the winners, and that Kaus has the highest score of those 4 while having the first tournament suggests he is actually more ahead of that group than it looks like. And I think those winners are a bit underrated. Those are the adjustments I would make. Um, but I think this is a pretty good list. Like if I look at this, like Bren had a really fantastic run in '05, '06. Virgil's run where he goes 7-0 in Triad Wars 5 and then just goes like, oh, that was the best the site had. All right, I guess I'll move on to other things in my life. I'm too good for this. Not exactly what he said, but I've heard similar stories. Um, is it should have a very high ranking here and does. I think this is a nice list. I'm pretty happy with how this one came out. Um, so yeah, I have some notes. So I think that we're underrating the very earliest players. There were 4 other players who had an average over 2100 that I didn't have space for: Black Bolt, Vid, Lionheart, and Bloody Abyss. Black Bolt and Lionheart often mentioned together, both of them with more other format success than tournaments. It's fun to see Vid appearing so early. I knew he played early. I knew he had some success early. Obviously, he will come back and become a multiple time champion. But it's cool that he was pretty good here, too. Seto also just missed. I could have included Seto. Seto could have made this list, except that his great run in '06, I'm going to include in his '06 to '08 run. And that will be so stupendous that will easily make up. But, like, Seto deserves to be here. Seto through 2006, and we'll have a list in a second that will show that, is obviously already one of the best players. He has not yet won a tournament, but he is entering his absolute heyday. Um, yeah. Some 2006 runs I put here, and some I put in the next video. The next video will be '06 to '08. So, for instance, Meta and Kana, I think of as a little more part of like the '06, '07, or '06 later era. While if we go back to the previous, someone like Virgil strikes me as very much part of this earlier era. Not a name I heard people talk about much when I started playing, while Meta and Kana very much were people like, especially Meta, because Kana kept playing, of course, but Meta was someone who wasn't really active, but you still saw in chats and was still very much around and felt part of the '06, '08 era to me rather than the '03, '06. But of course, Meta would rank very highly on this list were he included in this period. That was a judgment call. You'll see him in the next list, and in fact, you'll see him in a list in this video as well. Um, so we can do some other things beside best peaks because our system is designed that we should be able to compare overall careers. So I decided, again, we're going to try to make people look as good as possible. If, a player lost their first 3 tournament matches and then started playing better, right? I just cut those first 3 losses. If a player, plays 6 tournaments and then does really well and then plays a few tournaments after before stopping and they go 0-1 in those later tournaments, I cut the later tournaments. I'm not trying to hurt people's scores for, playing when they weren't as devoted to Triple Triad. I don't really care about that. I want to look at people as they were when they were, as it were. That was a horrible, horrible sentence. Apologies. So I'm trying to be as nice as possible to all the players. I'm trying, I think it's really cool when, and I talked about this in my last stats video, when a Slash of Time wins the second tournament he ever plays, or that, Doc Evil won the first 2 tournaments he ever played. But I also, I just don't care if someone, plays a bunch of tournaments before they get good. I want activity. I want people to be playing, even if I'm not so good at doing that. I want people to be playing, and I don't want it to be every extra tournament I play, I hurt my overall record and was up stupid rankings. I don't want that. I want it to be, well, if you have good results, that'll show up well. And if you have a stretch where you don't achieve anything, who cares? This shouldn't change our opinion much of players. So anyway, we are generously cutting stuff at the start and end. I'm not cutting stuff in the middle. And also, if a player only played 3 tournaments and the last one was bad, I'm going to include that, right? I'm only cutting from people who played a substantial number of tournaments, because if you didn't play very many tournaments, we should use all the data we have. So here are the retired careers. These are players who after 06 did not play, or played 1 tournament, and I counted them as basically retired. Or if they played 2, was very clearly a while later and not the same player. So here are the top retired players. This is not just their peaks. This is everything they did in their careers. If they played 1 tournament in 07, I included that here. I wasn't being a stickler, but yeah. Here's our list. I want to credit some Gafgarian with a nice finals run and an important member of the PL clan. I think he's someone who probably deserves to be mentioned a little more than I think he is, though I don't speak Polish, so maybe he is more than I think he is. Spitfire, the first finalist, is certainly underrated here. Aurora, one of the first players to ever get 2 icons, and including maybe both as semifinals, maybe 1 semifinals and 1 quarters. But one of the, I think he has 2 4-1s in the first 3 tournaments, which is honestly insane. And again, a little underrated because the results happened early before Elo could figure out who was good and who wasn't. Bryce always really impresses me whenever I see lists like this. Also, she might have been the founder of Occult Fan. I think she was the first editor, which is really cool. C17 was a player I always heard German players talk about very respectfully. Yeah, a lot of nice names here. So yeah, here's the top retired players. And let's head over to the top active players. Yeah. So here are players, who knows what will happen in the exciting new modern times of 2007. But here are the players to maybe look out for, as these are the players with the best active careers. Jadat actually is a good example of someone who first 5 tournaments lost every game and then became really good. So he is helped by cutting those, but it's part of the reason why Jadat's overall win percentage doesn't look so good, is because the extended career of his looked bad for the average numbers, but in fact, at his best, he was really good, as shown by being 4th on this list. You can also see that Meta and Seto, Seto has not yet won a tournament, Meta has by the end of 06, are clearly some of the top players around, and players to keep an eye out. They might go somewhere someday. We can also see Kana, who did not show up because, again, I included him much more in the 06 to 08 list, is already clearly one of the best players around. You can see why I kind of think of Kamikaze and Sujiro as the 2 best players of the era, but Cookie is right there, and again, he has the 2 championships, which they do not. So I think entering 06, Kamikaze, Sujiro, and Cookie in some order, with Doc Evil gone and with Karmazin gone, should be considered kind of the three clear best players on the site. Now they will be surpassed, but I think there is this moment when those are the three players that have a claim for best in the world at this moment, though they are about to be passed by Seto. Again, Kaus is a little underrated here, and will prove it in 2008. Love Dream Virus. His tournament record's always so cool. Basically robbed of icons by long tournaments, but just constantly making round 4. Really high. I'm high on Mafi Josie as well. It's always fun to see early young Tezuka. Jaws Grat, obviously great player. Yeah, lots of great players here. Kazik, I think, has gotten the first of his finals. Yeah, because he lost to Meta in his first finals, but has not yet gotten his second finals. Yevon has a finals. Scythe, his early career was better than I often give it credit for. He has a bunch of round 3s, some solid results. Same with Polo. Coops is about to make his first and only finals, but has not yet made it there. We see Young Stuff, who's played a couple tournaments and done really well. We see Dorf. We see Dalamar. And then we see a little bit of a drop-off, but Shadwell ends up doing well. Pogi is about to make a finals, or will make a finals for the next video. D is also about to break out, but has not done so yet. And Steve just always put up pretty good tournament results and never got any icons for it. It's such nonsense. But he was like very consistently good. And here you might say, okay, the average rating is 2,000 and he's a little under 2,000 here. But we've had some adjustments to the ratings and he's about to start doing better. So anyhow, that's our top active players. I think that's basically all I got for you, except I would really love it if someone sent me their list and wanted to talk about it, especially if you have knowledge from that time. But if you don't, just looking at these numbers, who jumps out to you? Where would you rank them? Like, I think there's a top 5. I historically have gone Doc, Kazi, Sujiro, Karma, Cookie, but like obviously I'm being insanely low on Cookie, and you should put him higher than I do. But I'm curious, or than I have historically. I'm kind of selling myself that Cookie is in fact just second. Yeah. It helps that I've talked more to Kazi and Sujiro. That probably biases me. And it also helps that Kazi and Sujiro were stronger players in the era when I was most active. And that's obviously going to really influence one's thinking. But yeah, I think I've underrated Cookie, and man, having like 2 top spots on most of these lists is just nuts. And Cookie is the only person doing that. Is Ulti top 10? Is Ulti the best non-winner? I think there's a very good case for that. And did I finally find a formula which properly says, yeah, Jadot is one of the very best non-winners. Maybe there are other contenders as time goes on, but certainly at this moment, you can see why people... When I joined the site in 08, it was like pretty widely understood, I think, that Jadot or Kazik were the best non-winners. Kazik had just gotten his second finals, but Jadot was the player like everyone respected and had a really impressive finals in Eris. And most of my numbers tend to be a little low on Jadot, and I hope this is finally one that does well there. I do doubt anyone will send me their lists, but I'd really appreciate it. So if you do, consider this a guilt trip. And if you have your ranking of players up to top 06, because what I think would be fun is if as I release more videos of this, you updated your list. Who falls out, who sustains. We're about to hit Delial and Seto. I think this is the end of the video. Nope, I have some criticism of this, but we're about to hit Deli and Seto. Some people will be kicked for them. Yeah, I'm really curious what people's lists look like. If anyone wants to send me them, it's okay if you don't. But guilt trip. Criticism. What do I think I'm missing here, or what do I think you should adjust for? Non-tournament performance, clan performance especially. I think competitive events where the result matters and you can't just pick your rule set is really important. So I am missing a lot of clan results, and a lot of the best players cared as much or more about clan stuff. Not all of them. I wouldn't say a majority or anything, though I don't really know, but certainly a lot of them, and maybe a majority. And so that's something that's not included here. Just general aura kind of stuff. But I only have tournaments. I do what I can. Um, I'd also, this goes game by game. It doesn't like know that you made a finals. It doesn't know that you won a tournament. It just goes, wow, you just won 7 games in a row against tough opponents. That's really good, right? And so you might give more credit to tournament winners if you think this is not giving them proper credit. Or tournament finalists, right? Ulti is the first player to make 2 finals, right? It's not Kazik, it's Ulti. And Ulti did it 3 years earlier. Maybe Ulti deserves more credit. And it's tournament only. So if you are making adjustments, those would be places I'd look. Also, there's the thing of the very first players are not getting proper credit for their wins. So I would like, you know, Kaus probably didn't look top 10 from the numbers I just gave, and he probably should be. Um, so as an example, maybe Mafi Josie as well should be a good bit higher. Anyhow, so yeah, those are my adjustments. Would be really curious if people had lists, whether you were there or not. Obviously, I was not there, um, but these are my favorite numbers right now for looking at what people achieved. And you now have access to all those rankings too. You can scroll through the video. So you really can come up with your own list and you can tell me why you moved some people about and how I have just constantly underrated Cookie over the years. And why would I do that? What do I have against cookies? It's a good question. All right, that's all I got for you.